Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist depression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. You are tuned to your local independent community radio station. I'm going to be hanging out with you for the next hour. My name's Andy and broadcasting on Jagger and Turrbal Country. And today on the show, we're going to be listening to a chat I had during the week with David Rovics, longtime American protest folk singer and activist. He has been travelling around Australia, and I thought I'd hang out with him and have a chat about making political music and working for a better world. And we talk quite a bit about social media and some of its effects, which is a favourite topic of mine to talk about. David Rovics has a useful perspective as somebody who's been the subject of an online cancellation campaign. So anyway, in due time you will hear all of those things if you hang around, and of course a bunch of songs, which is his main artistic output, although he does all kinds of things. So anyway, we're going to start off with one of his songs. This is a bit of a old classic of his to get us going. It's After the Revolution.
Was a time I'll always remember. I could never forget how reality came down around us like some Western movie set. When the dust all settled, the sun shone so bright, and a great calm took over us like it was all gonna be alright. That's how it felt to be alive after the revolution. From Groton to Tacoma, on many a factory floor, the workers talked of solidarity and refused to build weapons of war. No more will we make missiles, we're gonna do something different. And for the first time, their children were proud of their parents. Somewhere in Gaza, a little boy smiled and cried after the revolution. Prison doors swung open, mothers hugged their sons. The Liberty Bell was ringing when the cops put down their guns. 1 million innocent people lit up in the springtime air. And Mooney and Leonard and Sarah Jane Olsen took a walk in Tompkins Square. And they talked about what they do now after the revolution. Debts were all forgiven in all the Neil colonies. Soldiers left their bases, went back to their families. A non-aggression abolition treaty was signed with every sovereign state. All the terrorist groups disbanded with no empire left to hate. And they all started planting olive trees after the revolution. George Bush and Henry Kissinger were sent off to the World Court. Their plans for global domination were preemptively cut short. Their weapons of mass destruction were inspected and destroyed. Battleships dismantled, never again to be deployed. And the world breathed a sigh of relief after the revolution. Solar panels were on the rooftops, trains upon the tracks. Organic food was in the markets, no GMOs upon the racks. And all the billionaires had to learn how to share. Bill Gates was told to quit his whining when he said it wasn't fair. And his mansion became a collective farm after the revolution. All the political poets couldn't think of what to say, so they all decided to live life for today. I spent a few years catching up with all my friends and lovers, sleeping till 11, home beneath the covers. And I learned how to play the accordion after the revolution.
That was David Rovics there with After the Revolution, and I did chat with David during the week about all kinds of things. You're going to hear the chat today on the Paradigm Shift, interspersed of course with a few of his songs, so let's get into it.
My name is David Rovics, and I'm a singer-songwriter from Portland, Oregon these days.
And you've been touring around Australia for the last couple of weeks, but touring around the world for the last couple of decades, I would say, playing acoustic folk music. What is it that you do? What drives you and what's taking you around the world?
I write songs about current events and history in the sort of what many people would consider to be the folk vein, although a lot of people associated with that term don't use the term, but like including the what many call the grandfather of folk music in the U.S., Pete Seeger, who stopped calling himself a folk musician like several decades before he died because of the complexities of the term. But genre aside, I write songs and I travel and perform and tour and do that kind of troubadour thing. That it's a tradition, global tradition that goes way, way back. Been doing it since the 90s.
So I'm interested in the 90s when a lot of people were maybe getting into grunge or techno or something like that you started writing folk music and political folk music. What were your inspirations to start that?
Well, I guess my inspirations were not necessarily rooted in the 90s because I was exposed to this whole thing as a kid, like both the sort of political activist scene that I'm still kind of rooted in today and basically writing about and for, But in the late 70s, when I was a little kid, I was 12 years old when I was going to a camp run by an anti-nuclear Unitarian minister in Massachusetts, and there was a lot of activity around the anti-nuke movement at the time after the 3 Mile Island meltdown in Pennsylvania, and so I was exposed to music as a tool for social movements at the age of 12, and very impressed. And it wasn't like I dropped everything. I decided to put down the bicycle and and Dungeons and Dragons, and decided I was going to start writing songs. But that was my first exposure to the whole tradition. And in my late teens is when I started really getting into writing songs and playing that kind of music.
You mentioned there's complexities with the term folk music or something, but I think you can certainly see your music as fitting in a lineage that goes, a long way back to communal sing-alongs, and then more recently, I guess, your Pete Seeger, Irish Rebel songs, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, all these things like that. Do you see yourself as part of this kind of tradition of folk music? And I guess, what do you see as the complexities with that term?
Well, I definitely see myself as part of that tradition, but the thing is that it's where it becomes complex is folk music. Includes all of those different artists and traditions that you mentioned, but it also includes punk rock, African music, and South American music, and Asian music, and it is in every language on the planet, and it doesn't sound similar to each other. So the genre, if we're talking about folk music with a small f, as defined by music created by people in the oral tradition, which is anything in the world that is not classical music, that's way too broad. So if we're talking about white people from the English-speaking world who play acoustic instruments and sing songs about anything, that's still really broad. But at least it's narrowing it down. But it's narrowing it down in a somewhat random way.
It's interesting to think about the idea of the medium as the message, and the medium of acoustic folk music comes with certain virtues about ease of travel, accessibility for who can write and record and perform. You don't need all the equipment and everything like that. As well as, I guess, the quietness of it means you can hear the words a bit easier and things like that. Do you think there are things about the medium of acoustic music that does lend itself well to communicating about politics and things that matter?
But if I were to just answer that question in one word, I'd just say yes. But to expand on that a little, I think the reason why that is the case is largely because of the limitations of certain technologies. And from my sort of just real life experience, if you've got a drummer in the band, it's impossible to hear the lyrics. And it's nothing negative about drummers. It's just the technology of trying to mic vocals without causing feedback, while the singers can hear themselves above the drums on the stage. It's just this technology has never been worked out. It's just a problem. So you're not going to be able to. It's not going to be some kind of situation where you can focus on the lyrics. Most of the time. And maybe someday that'll get figured out. But in the meantime, it sure helps to play with less going on the stage, like without a drum set. Yeah, so there's a lot of technical reasons why acoustic music is better for conveying stories, and also the style. There's more words involved. Like in a rock and roll song or a punk rock song or many other what classical musicians or folk musicians would both call the popular genres. There's a lot less room for lyrics. With folk and in the folk tradition and in the hip hop tradition, there's a lot of room for lyrics. So they're both fantastic mediums for storytelling.
One of the issues that comes up with any kind of making of radical art, I think, is that you can make this art that sort of exists in its own world and is kind of removed from the actual things that people do to create change, which is generally some form of political organising in a group. And sometimes even we can think that we're being radical by consuming radical art, but that sort of takes away from the need to join together. It's not quite that simple, but I wonder if you have thoughts about that tension of making radical art and how to link it to the things on the ground that generally lead to creating positive change.
That's an interesting question. For one thing, I think radical art is an important element of any kind of social movement because it helps people feel like they're part of something, that it helps foster a sense of community, it helps inspire people to keep on going, it brings people together, it often brings people from different political tendencies into the same room to hear music that they all like. So there's so many different things that radical music and other forms of radical art can do to contribute to helping sustain and build a social movement. And this has been true forever, since social movements and since music have existed. And they've both existed since long before, recorded history. But certainly this is a phenomenon going way back. But when it comes to radical artists who are not necessarily coming out of social movements or part of a social movement in that sort of really grassroots organic sense. Like, for example, a band that had big hits and became really famous, like, for example, Rage Against the Machine. I love Rage Against the Machine. And they became very famous very early on in their careers, and they're also very political radicals. And that's, I think, always been a challenge for them to figure out how to navigate, because, they'll attract a stadium full of people, but it's not a stadium full of radicals. It's a stadium mainly full of people that are into, Tom Morello's guitar playing and, Zach's rapping and singing, and, they want to hear certain songs that were hits. But, when Rage Against the Machine played at the Democratic National Convention protests in 2007 in Colorado, they led a march out of the stadium afterwards. And that was interesting because, out of the tens of thousands of people who were at the stadium for their show, which was like a reunion concert, they hadn't played in, years together, I think 3,000 people followed them out of the stadium to march into town, which I thought was very impressive. And it was by far the biggest march of the whole week there of activities. But it definitely wasn't the full stadium. So you could see, the tension in that right there.
Is it something that's come up in your own thinking about your own art? Or do you think that you are mostly playing to people that are connected to a social movement in some way?
Oh, yeah, it never comes up for me because almost all my gigs are organized by people who are already involved with social movements, and then I'm usually playing a role of being a cheerleader for their group or their movement, or the anti-war movement, Palestine solidarity, environmental movement, anti-capitalist groups, global justice movement. Folks supporting refugees and opposing fortress, draconian racist policies, and, folks against police brutality and labor unions. It's the same kinds of groups everywhere.
Come on, fire! Hey, Roger. Keep shooting.
I watched it on the TV. Machine guns fired towards the ground. I watched the people run. Helicopter gunship strafing the street. I watched them lining up the bodies in the Baghdad heat. They say these leaks had consequences, and I must agree. When I saw them fire on the children, it affected me. I thought, what if I were wearing the other shoe? If I had a hammer, what would I do? I am just a person, like anyone. I am just another mother's son. I have no special powers. I cannot fly, not like that helicopter gunship up in the sky, sending all those bullets all around to the journalists and children on the ground. I am just one man, that's very true. But if I had a hammer, what would I do? Sometimes I try to wonder, why should I care? But then the answer seems so obvious. There are people down there. And right here in Queensland, there's an army base. And there's a helicopter gunship just sitting in place. There's a time for watching. There's a time to act. It's just gonna kill more children if it remains intact. I am just one person, but you are too. And if you had a hammer, what would you do? If you had a hammer, what would you do?
That is David Rovics there, If I Had a Hammer, of course playing on the title of a famous American anti-war folk song, but that one is one of a couple of songs I'm going to play on the show today by David Rovics about Queensland anti-war activists. That one about Brian Law, who back in 2011 put a garden mattock through the side of a Eurotiger attack helicopter to disarm that particular killing machine. I'm going to go back to speaking with David Rovics about his folk music now, and we're going to take a slightly different tack in the interview because in recent years there's been a bit of a campaign running against David Rovics, mainly online, although it spills out into gigs that he does, basically accusing him of being an anti-Semite and a neo-Nazi. We'll talk a bit about all of this, and so you'll have more understanding by the end of the interview. But basically, I think this is a symptom of a way of doing politics that has just gone very wrong, particularly in the US. Incredibly puritanical, individualistic idea of how to do politics, that he's just looking for an opportunity to take down people who seem to be high up. And David Rovics is part Jewish. His family were amongst the Holocaust survivors in Europe, and he spent his entire career singing songs against fascism and things like that. But it's not enough for some particular people on the internet. And during his time in Australia, I was involved doing a gig with him and also having him on this radio show. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is if we're picking sides in this kind of battle over whether to cancel David Rovics or not, I want to be on the side of you shouldn't cancel people just on somebody's arbitrary opinion and then a pile on social media. And if we want our politics to turn into something that can have real-world influence beyond just arguments online, there's got to be room for disagreement about people's beliefs and tactics and things like that, but still finding some way to work together. So anyway, that's the context of the conversation you're about to hear. Well, I want to take a bit of a left turn here in our interview, and you're a very prolific social media user in technology, but you're also very critical of social media. I wonder if you can talk a bit about that, your feelings about it, and I guess how it relates to using it to communicate.
Yeah. Well, social media, I think these corporations specifically, Meta and, Google and YouTube, Twitter, they've all played different roles in creating the current dystopia that we're in. But their algorithms and the basic ways that they are structured are designed to foment conflict and spread disinformation and sensationalism. And they are designed to promote moral outrage and grandstanding, and they are a massive hindrance to real deep communication or organizing efforts. And I think all that has been really evident since Facebook came on the scene. And having real communication and doing real organizing and using the internet for those purposes is very possible. And this was in great evidence in the late 90s and early noughties when the global justice movement around the world was doing all the things that we were doing. I think partly, not entirely by any means, but I think looking back, partly the success of this movement and its ability to organize and grow and do all sorts of things involving tens of thousands of participants at a time in cities around the world was a product to a certain extent of the ease of organizing and communication through the medium of email and email lists, and also to a somewhat lesser degree, but importantly, platforms like indie media. But when Facebook and then the others, along with them, YouTube and Twitter, took over the whole our communications through the means that they did, and we can get into how they did that, but they did that. And when they did that, so many of the ways that we used to be able to communicate and organize were taken away from us. I mean, not that they don't exist anymore, but they're not used. So when people aren't going to use effective means of communicating and organizing, and they're going to rely on these corporate platforms and their algorithms, well, it's been an unmitigated disaster. And there's so many consequences that it would be, impossible to list them. But we certainly list some of them.
Mm. Well, one of the consequences is what was once called Twitter mobs or something, and has more recently been called cancel culture. This kind of when an individual is called out as having done something wrong, and then there's a kind of pile-on using these online technologies. And you are somebody who can speak from experience about being cancelled and what that's like. And so I think that's a worthwhile perspective. Do you mind sharing with us your own experience of being cancelled?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And these, it's so true that the way that these social media platforms are set up, it totally they lend themselves to this kind of like mob action. There's a tendency that if somebody that you have any kind of like or trust or believe or have some good association with condemns another person on one of these platforms, then the tendency for a lot of people is just to figure, oh, that must be right. I'll retweet that, or I'll like that, or I'll join in this pile on. It just I think at the beginning, especially for many years before people started really thinking about these things, and before people started knowing other people who had this campaigning against them happen, where people know people who have been attacked like this repeatedly, continually. Once people started thinking about it, I think a lot of people are getting sussed out to how this phenomenon works and how damaging it is, and people are more likely to want to know something about an accusation before they just share it. But these platforms lend themselves to sharing these kinds of accusations, But for me, it started with a group called the Anti-Deutsch in Germany back in 2002, before any of these social media platforms existed. And they did their cancellation campaigning by showing up at my gigs and handing out flyers about how I'm an anti-Semite. So it was much more direct, and they would call venues and tell them that they were going to smash the windows if they didn't cancel my gig and that kind of thing. So this phenomenon goes, and of course it goes way back before my lifetime, but in my lifetime, the phenomenon predates social media, and it was originally connected to my criticism of the apartheid state of Israel, which some misguided young guilt-ridden Germans think is anti-Semitic to criticize.
Mm. And the more recent campaign, again about anti-Semitism, but it related to your role as an interviewer. You make a podcast, and in the middle of extremely heated culture war between alt-right and far-left people in your home city of Portland, but across the United States, you ventured to try to cross the divide and interview somebody who'd been involved in the alt-right. And I guess, can you explain what happened from there?
I mean, cross the divide would be a bit of a stretch. I'm not trying to form an alliance with a fascist group. But I think that it's very important to communicate with anybody, especially people that have political points of view that are very popular, actually. And when you have the opportunity to communicate with somebody who holds a popular political view, who is willing to honestly engage with you and not insult or shout at you or more grandstand, but actually honestly answer your questions and talk about their perspective. And in the case of I'm mainly accused of interviewing two different individuals, that Gilad Etzman and Matthew Heimbach. When you interview somebody on your YouTube channel, so that they don't like, they call that platforming. Communication with somebody you don't like is platforming, because somehow by me talking to them, that makes them more acceptable to the left, and then other people are going to listen to their ideas and be swayed by them, and then all the left becomes fascist somehow. I don't know. It's a magical process, because apparently the attraction of fascism is so strong in the minds of my critics that if you communicate to a fascist, which actually I've never done on my online, but this is what I'm accused of having done. So let's just assume I did do it. If you communicate with a fascist, then you are platforming fascism, and you are somehow going to build the fascists' cause or their case, which is a very interesting perspective, because it presupposes that that left socialist or anarchist perspective is not very convincing in the face of a fascist perspective, which will for some reason win over people to their side, which I actually know to be untrue. And actually, if you communicate with right wingers, you have the potential of reaching their fans and changing their fans' perspective. This has repeatedly been my experience in life. So I really wonder about my critics, who seem to be so incapable of communicating that they just don't want anybody else to do it either, because we'll all just somehow become fascists, which it's just nonsense. It makes no sense. But it's a old sort of authoritarian perspective. These are authoritarian impulses to ban, to block, to censor, not to communicate. None of that has any place in any kind of sensible left-wing or anarchist environment involving thinking, compassionate people who are interested in changing the world and building a movement and reaching a common understanding with those around us, and obviously trying to understand why people like Trump, Bolsonaro, and Modi have such a huge following. And it's a disenfranchised fan base that is born out of the inability of progressive governments to take care of the people of their country, and when progressive governments fail to do that, then that gives rise to far right movements, and we can easily understand that phenomenon, and we can communicate with people from the right about this phenomenon, and we can recruit them to a more sensible worldview. I mean, this is absolutely necessary if we're going to build a left-wing movement. How could you build a left-wing movement in an environment like the United States where most people are voting for fascists? You have to talk to them.
When you're working 2 jobs and living in a tent, when a house costs $1 million and you can't pay the rent, when politicians say they'll help but it keeps getting worse each time the landlord lobby pulls the strings of the purse, when the human right to housing isn't even part of the debate, you know you're living in a failed state. Millions of citizens are spending half their lives locked up in a prison for trying to survive. When laws must be broken just to have a place to stay. When the prisons pay the senators to look the other way. If you have to be a criminal to put food upon your plate, you know you're living in a failed state. Facing climate breakdown, when the trees are all on fire, when half the country's underwater, when a climate change denier runs the nation and the opposition party votes for oil rigs and pipelines. This is not so much a country as it is a corporation buckling under its weight. You know you're living in a failed state. Your nation is an empire facing daily blowback, and the only thing your leaders can think to do is attack. Bipartisan consensus that we need to spend $700 billion before the year's end on a military budget to make America great. You know you're living in a failed state. Every day, some psycho with a gun has to open fire on a crowd before it's done. When a music festival becomes a free fire zone, and all they can say is it's okay now, he was acting alone. Buy some armor, pray to God, and hide behind a gate. You know you're living in a failed state. You know you're living in a failed state. You know you're living in a failed state.
On the Paradigm Shift, that is David Rovics there with Failed State. We have been chatting with the same David Rovics over the course of the show, and I've got one last bit of that interview which I'm about to play for you now. Well, that's a bit of a segue into talking about the United States. Here in Australia, we watch, fortunately separated by a long distance geographically, but not politically.
No.
Have a big difference. The US has immense influence on Australian foreign policy, and I think in our social movements, things like that kind of Puritanism, which I think so much comes out of the US,
Totally.
has certainly influenced the way Australian politics is done. But I think looking at the US, the divides in that country, the inability of that state or unwillingness to look after its citizens who are, down and out. This year they're averaging a mass shooting a day in the US, and just it's a horrendous thing to look at, this country that is still the most influential country in the world. I wonder if you have many insights about what is going on in America today and what hope is there? What does the future look like?
Yeah. I mean, the influence of the U.S. in Australia and globally is really obviously profound, and but it's also interesting to see that although anywhere in the world that has not banned Facebook or YouTube, which I think would be a sensible thing for most any government to do, actually, because I mean, when the the U.S. Congress is debating banning TikTok, which I think it's only a crazy idea when you're not also considering banning Facebook and YouTube and various other platforms, unless you can actually make their algorithms transparent and democratic and open to understanding and open to regulation and oversight by who knows what kind of bodies of people. But we can't be letting these corporations control our lives like this. But as long as other countries are letting these CIA billionaire-controlled platforms influence their citizens, then the rest of the world is just inviting this kind of undermining of their societies, of their democracies, of their ability to communicate with one another, and they're handing it over to billionaires from Silicon Valley who do not have their interests at heart. They have profit at heart, that's all. And hegemony. They really are trying to take over these areas that they're working on taking over. I mean, Spotify is an exception. They're based in Sweden, but they have the same goals in terms of totally dominating an area of business, like in Spotify's case, music streaming. They now have become the majority of music streaming in the world is Spotify. All the other platforms together make up the other half or something like that. And this is the kind of hegemony that the other American corporations like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube are all going for. And I mean, they're just some prominent examples of how the U.S. influences the world today, but it's the influence is real. But one of the things I've noticed is the level of discord that is sort of created by using these platforms to engage in cancellation campaigns as a phenomenon that is much more widespread in the United States than it is in any of the other countries that I go to. And it really makes me wonder about who's conducting these campaigns and why they've become so massively more common since 2020. And I and other people that I know who have been involved with activism in the United States for a long time very much feel like this is there's nefarious actors involved who are probably paid agents of the state that are involved with this counterinsurgency kind of thing that they've been doing. I mean, it's just so widespread, it's hard to even literally most of the best organizers I know around the country have been canceled over the past few years. No exaggeration.
Well, it's been an interesting chat, Dave, on lots of different topics. One final question, I guess, as somebody yourself who's been around a long time in radical politics, do you have any tips for how to stay involved for a long time, and as you get older and your life changes, how to stay connected and how to hold on to hope?
Turn off your computer. I mean, that's my first recommendation. I use computers and social media all the time, but the first thing I would say is meet your neighbors, be involved with actual real community. Your community is not on the screen. Your community is out there in the form of physical people that you meet and know. That's your community. That's what community is, and people need to get reconnected with that to start with. But you're not going to find joy or you're not going to be able to organize through these platforms, and they're gonna have a bad effect on your life. And most of the people listening to this conversation spend 4 to 6 hours every day scrolling through feeds on social media or engaging on social media platforms, and that's just a fact. Consider not doing that and trying to. We need to be back in the real world. That's and not thinking that we can live through screens. It's not working. It's really, really not working. But there's so much else that could be said. But that's, I think, the next step for humanity, if we're going to be making any progress here, is to figure out how to reconnect with each other in the real world.
Mm-hmm. All right, David. Well, if people are interested in hearing more of your music, your writing, conversations, things like that, how can they do that?
Oh, I'm on all the music streaming platforms, and davidrovics.com is my website, and there's lots of other stuff there that you won't find on the other platforms.
All right. Thanks very much, David.
Thank you.
Like a brand new Brillo. Spot on the block, no cot, no Zillow. Found a bathroom stall and a weep like a willow. Never really know how the dominoes fall till you on the corner, back against the wall. I'm on the corner, it's against the law. Minute to minute, they got my life on pause. Cops a beast when they talk to me. Could be shot or beaten, it's a lot to see. Hand on the Glock when they watching me. We gotta stop the sweets before I'm deceased.
You have the right to own a gun, the right to own a knife. If you own some property, you could defend it with your life. You have the right to stand your ground, the right to self-defense, the right to own a mansion surrounded by a fence, the right not to house a soldier who comes looking for a bed, the right to remain silent if it was something that you said. Yes, if you own a business, it has the right to thrive, but you don't have the right to survive.
Got a right to survive, I'ma stay alive. We got a right to thrive, but they act surprised. See me on the street and meet my eyes. I know the air we breathe is both yours and mine. I want y'all to fight, stand up and rise, cause we all got a right to survive. I want y'all to fight, stand up and rise, cause we all got a right to survive. I want y'all to fight, stand up and rise, cause we all got a right to survive. I want y'all to fight, stand up and rise, cause we all got a right to survive.
Well, we did talk earlier in that interview about the different merits of acoustic folk music and hip-hop music when it comes to communicating about political issues, and just there you heard David Rovics combining the two. That song is called Right to Survive. It's off an EP called Take the Power Back that Rovics did with rapper Mike Crenshaw, and good on him for attempting a bit of stylistic variation when you've recorded about 25 albums or something of acoustic folk music. Sometimes you want to try different things, and so he's done that. He certainly has tried to collaborate with different people over the years, David Rovics, and I think last year there was one with an American punk band. He did a collaborative album, and I guess that's part of his artistic ethos as well, in how to bring about the kind of changes that you want to talk about in society, how to live them out in music, is trying to collaborate across different stylistic and cultural barriers. Anyway, before then, you did hear me chatting with David Rovics, as it has been all show, about some of his thoughts about the current state of America, about social media, and about folk music. Here's another song from David, this one about another one of our Queensland-born activists, Julian Assange.
Someone blew the whistle back in 2006. Was a matter of a password and a couple of clicks to safely send files and protect the sources while sharing all the important bits, of course. With a database that's searchable all around the earth, that exposed the rich and powerful, showed us what they're worth, showed us the corrupt ways they run affairs. From Iceland to the Indies to almost everywhere, making clothes transparent on emperors all round. Everywhere that whistleblowers are to be found. WikiLeaks was too effective, it had to be beaten out. Let there be no doubt. Now they want to kill the messenger while most of us stand by, just waiting for this prisoner to die. Daniel Ellsberg blew the whistle on war crimes. He called out for someone to step up this time. With WikiLeaks' assistance, when Chelsea Manning did on torture and mass murder, she blew the lid. And the war on WikiLeaks went into overdrive as the authorities tried hard to make sure it couldn't survive. Now they want to kill the messenger while most of us stand by, just waiting for this prisoner to die. Charges plucked from history, the Espionage Act is being used against Assange under the Extradition Pact. Not just Republican war criminals, but Democrats too had it out for him now for telling what he knew when the DNC rigged the race. Got Clinton the nomination, put Sanders in his place. Now they want to kill the messenger while most of us stand by, just waiting for this prisoner to die. Now they'll call him a foreign agent, say he should be shot. They'll call him a narcissist, whatever defamation they got. They'll say he's not a journalist, unlike the ones in Moscow, reporting on the criminals that we allow reporters to report on. We give them the Nobel, while this Australian is caged and sent to hell. Now they want to kill the messenger while most of us stand by, just waiting for this prisoner to die. Now they want to kill the messenger while most of us stand by, just waiting for this prisoner to die.
That is Killing the Messenger there, a tribute to Julian Assange, who unbelievably is still being detained in Belmarsh prison while the US push to extradite him to face charges of espionage. Currently, he is guilty of no crime, and he has been imprisoned in one form or another since 2011, and he still is sitting there while the court decides whether he is able to be extradited to the US to face certainly political charges. Now, there is an event coming up around Julian Assange in Brisbane. It is called the Persecution of Truth, and it's a bit of a conference happening at the State Library of Queensland. There's quite a lineup of speakers, including Greg Barnes, a famous lawyer who is on Julian Assange's lawyer team. There's some people from Queensland Council of Civil Liberties, Michael West, independent journalist, and John Shipton, who is Julian Assange's dad and his primary advocate, as well as David McBride, another Australian whistleblower who is still being pursued for leaking the Afghan files, as they were called, to the ABC, even though the Brereton inquiry later backed up everything that he said, and now this being charged as being pursued against the soldiers. So you can hear from David as well as other people to talk about the situation for truth tellers in our society. It's happening Sunday, April 30th, 1 to 5 p.m. at the State Library, and there is a charge of $20 or $25 to help get everybody there, and I encourage you to go along to that. And it really is a case that demands our solidarity. Julian Assange, I mean, there's been various issues over the years, but at this stage he's been pursued on purely political charges that relate simply to telling the truth. Nothing else, simply to releasing information that has been verified as correct to the public, and that is called journalism, even though sometimes it's hard to remember with the current state of journalism that's what you're meant to do, but in anybody's definition, that is journalism, and yet he is being pursued for potentially life in prison, and it's already taken an incredible toll. We're just about out of time on the paradigm shift. In the final couple of minutes, I'll take another opportunity to plug the station that you're listening to, 4ZZZ. It is not like other radio stations which, rely on advertising dollars to pay for all the infrastructure and personnel and whatever, and so then are beholden to profit margins and the cultural dictates of their advertisers. No, 4ZZZ is totally independent, and that way we can play things because we think they're worthwhile, no matter how commercial they are. We can tell the news that we think is important and true, not what our advertisers want you to hear or the board of the station wants you to hear. But to do all this, we require a bit of support from our listeners, and that's where you come in, because if everybody pitches in a little bit, then we get a great radio station out of it. And so it is April Atonement, a time where we kindly remind everybody to subscribe to the station, and if you do it during this month, you can win some great prizes. So head to the 4ZZZ website to do that. You can do lots of other things at that website, read reviews of local events and albums. You can listen back to old episodes of shows. There's all kinds of great pages. Otherwise, call up the station 3252-1555, pitch in a bit of money. There's varying amounts depending on your financial situation and how much you want to give, but please do it, because when there's good community media, then everybody in our community is a winner. But that's all for me for another week. I'm going to go out with one final David Rovics song, one of his old classics. This is Behind the Barricades. See you next week.
When the world has gone crazy, and it's all becoming clear, when they're gunning down our comrades, and it seems the end is near, as they're loading up the launchers for the tear gas grenades, we can take off our bandanas and kiss behind the barricades. When it's madness all around, and you can see this at a glance, we will sing and we will cry, we will laugh and we will dance. as they shout their marching orders beneath the helicopter blades. We shall seize the moment for a kiss behind the barricades. They will try to break our spirit, and at times they may succeed, but our love for the world is stronger than their greed. When the building is surrounded and hope begins to fade, in my final hour, a kiss behind the barricades. As the movement grows, there will be hills and bends, but at the center of the struggle are your lovers and your friends. And the more we hold each other up, the less we can be swayed. Here's the love and solidarity, and a kiss behind the barricade.